Welcome to another Telltale Books video. I'm Greg, and I'm here to continue my J.G. Ballard series with his, where are we at? This is his 19th published work titled Storm Wind. For those of you who are new to Telltale Books, let me tell you that we are primarily a review channel focused on all varieties of literature, all genres, though we do tend to get a little heavy on science fiction. That's my fault. I love science fiction. There was a point in my life where that's all I ever read. And I'm trying to cover all that stuff that I read when I was young that I really loved, as well as some of the stuff that I never got around to that I always wanted to read. And we publish a lot off as often as possible. My partner Emily Schmidt joins me for these videos, but she is busier and does a lot less reading than I do. So there's a lot of times, like with this one, I'm on my own. And that's okay. Love having her here. Our original concept was more of a book club, and that's why we wanted the two of us sitting together talking to one another. I wish it would work that way more often, but I'm on my own for a lot of this stuff. Like J.G. Ballard, I don't have anybody to read Ballard with me because I'm the only one interested in this stuff. J.G. Ballard is an amazing author. He has been accepted as a literate author, writing regular literary fiction. He has been accepted as one of the great late 20th century authors in England. And my exploration of his work proves it. I first came across Ballard in the early 1980s. He published a story in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction called Myths of the Near Future. And I read it and I loved it. And I really loved how he took the imagery of, 1960s, 70s civilization, what really existed, and he was looking at it from a near future vantage point where it was kind of like ancient ruins, which really does happen. I mean, it's going to get torn down soon, but we've got this whole mall not far away from me here in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, that is just sitting there. The weeds are getting tall, the pavement in the parking lot is all broken up, and the building just stands there empty. It's a shell of what it used to be, and a relic of an age when those shopping malls were really big and sprouting up everywhere, and everybody was going shopping there. And now that's gone already. And Ballard was seeing this kind of stuff as even way back in the 1960s. He almost miraculously had his pulse on the future of our society, of our civilization, the near future. He didn't see a need to go into the far future or to other planets to find science fiction subjects. He found it in the world around him. And he wrote in kind of a surrealistic manner. And in doing so, he illuminated truths about our society long before anybody else was really even thinking about them. And that brings me to Stormwind, which is, I believe I said, that's my 19th work on my bibliography of him. It was published in New Worlds magazine in 2 parts. I've got both issues here. And this is how I read them, because Stormwind is a novella and was a edited down version of a novel that Ballard was already writing and already heading for publication, called The Wind from Nowhere. He published the shorter and somewhat different version in New Worlds and called it Stormwind. Because of its relation to that novel, which was then published a few months later in January of 1962, Stormwind hasn't been reprinted at all that I know of. I'm not aware of anywhere that you can find the story except in these two issues of New Worlds magazine, numbers 110 and 111, if you're looking for them. These are available as PDFs on the internet. I love Ballard enough that I really wanted to get those issues. So I did. I paid the money to buy old copies of those magazines. What happens is all of a sudden people start noticing it's getting windy and staying windy. And you don't have like gusts of wind. It's a steady wind, constant, all the time, 24/7, not letting up. And with each day, it seems to get worse. And over a period of months, it gets worse and worse. Ultimately, the winds all over the globe, over most of the globe, get up to more than 250 miles per hour. And at that point, I mean, it's picking up buildings and tossing them. So the cities of the world become leveled. Transportation is impossible because you go outside and you're going to get just pelted with gravel and slivers of metal and concrete that are just flying through these winds coming at you. And even people will get picked up by the wind and just taken, like in Wizard of Oz. And there are scientific theories about just what's happening, but you never really get a definite, this is what happened. It's just this wind came up and started blowing and didn't stop and kept going and kept getting worse and just destroyed everything. People, of course, had to go underground. Subways became popular. There were people who already had like cellars or whatever that they could go into and live. That's where people had to live. And everybody venturing out was getting killed. Huge numbers of people died. The cities were all leveled. Ships were tossed ashore. The military tried to deal with it, but there was nothing they could do about it. And, and Ballard even at one point has a character make the joke that we all talk about the weather, but nobody's doing anything about it, which was really funny in this story. In the midst of it is a billionaire, or maybe he was just a millionaire, but he had gobs and gobs of money, and he made his money through the construction industry. So he had a construction industry. He was employing construction workers. He knew how to get all the materials, and he had already, before the wind started, he had already been building an underground thing in the middle of London. And above it was what was being called, his name was Hodder, I think. I don't think I wrote it down, but there's no, I didn't jot down his name, and I don't remember exactly. It started with an H. I think it's Hodder, something like that. Anyway, they call it his tower because he's got a building on top of this underground structure. But once the wind starts blowing and his tower is gone, he starts building a pyramid structure, thinking that that will survive. And he's only taking select people into this pyramid. And he actually has a employees that are basically thugs that actually will kill people to keep them from knowing what is going on and keep them from trying to claim a place inside of what's being built. Now, the military in London has gotten a hold of submarines, and they're going to go up to the Arctic Circle because the winds are worst at the equator. As you go further north, they get less intense, so that up by the Arctic Circle, the winds are only like 80, 90 miles per hour at the worst of this storm. And I say that this book is prescient because you do hear a lot of talk today about how storms are getting more intense and more frequent, more hurricanes, as a result of changes that we're seeing in the Earth's overall climate. And in light of that, looking back at Stormwind, it seems like Ballard was, spot on with that sort of thing, except that Ballard exaggerated it to surrealistic levels and made this apocalyptic story out of it. The style of the book is a little more traditional than what I've read so far from Ballard. It reads a lot like Hollywood movies, where there's some kind of invasion and the whole movie is told, 1950s science fiction movies where the movie is told from the point of view of scientists and the military joining forces to try to defeat whatever's going on, whether it's an invasion of giant ants or an invasion from Mars, like in War of the Worlds, or the coming of Ballard in When Worlds Collide. They all have this same sort of theme, and When Worlds Collide also has that theme of that industrialist that wants to use his money to make sure he's got a seat on the ship that takes them to safety, which you kind of have here in Stormwind, except Ballard kind of intensifies that character to be almost like the captain in Moby Dick, obsessed with this goal, kind of an obsessed character who will stop at nothing, building this Tower of Babel to try to preserve himself. The interesting thing, a lot of disaster novels pretty much show people devolving completely into barbarism. Ballard does not go there. They're still, even though they're bad people, most of them still have good intentions and have good sides to them. So the characters are presented as both good and bad, strong and weak, just like real people would be. Ballard did an excellent job with characterization. Does his usual excellent job of writing the descriptions of this destruction that's going on are can't really call it beautiful, but they're cool. He has a painterly way that for me evokes J.M.W. Turner and his paintings. Matter of fact, there's a specific painting I have in mind that if you saw the beginning, I used it for the title card for this. It's a painting by Turner of one of the plagues of Egypt, and it kind of sort of fits the main image in the later part of this book. It's an excellent book, but I don't think it is Ballard at his very best. It's probably, Ballard at his worst is still stronger writer than the vast majority of science fiction writers. But I don't want to give this one top tail status because I do believe that some of the others that I'm going to be getting into after this are going to be much stronger works. But that's the only reason, not because this is a bad story, but because I just think there are greater things to come as I journey down through um, through Ballard bibliography. At this point, Stormwind is his longest published work. So it's his first novel. You know, we're still talking about early Ballard here. He's done some great things, but he hasn't tackled anything this long before. And I think it shows. But I'm not saying that there are weaknesses here. I'm just saying that the strengths aren't as incredible as they will become. Even though I'm not giving this top tail status, I highly recommend it. This is an amazing work from a period of time when British authors were very focused on all these end of the world stories. You had Day of the Triffids and Midwich Cuckoos and of course Ballard with The Wind from Nowhere and quite a variety of other British authors that were writing these end of the world scenarios. It became a subgenre on its own, I think, as British destruction novels. So, and Ballard is probably the most imaginative of them, you know, and definitely, in my opinion, the strongest writer of those types of books. So highly recommended. Like I say, tracking this down, the only way to find it is in New Worlds magazine. The person who is not the Ballard completist would be, I think, perfectly okay skipping Stormwind and just going for the novel The Wind from Nowhere and reading that. Yeah, I would advise doing that. Don't worry about reading Stormwind. Just go read The Wind from Nowhere. But for me, I had to read Stormwind because now in a couple of stories, I'm going to be reading The Wind from Nowhere and I'm going to compare and contrast. You know, so I have to read it for my videos. You don't have to read Stormwind. And it's essentially the same story as The Wind from Nowhere. So, you know, if you're not doing what I'm doing, what's the point? Go read The Wind from Nowhere. Skip Stormwind. But Stormwind was a really enjoyable read. I very much enjoyed reading it. And I was very excited reading it. I was glued to it. It's a two-parter. And even though it's only considered a novella, I read through this in one day. I don't usually do that with longer works, but I just was glued to that one and I got through the whole thing in one day. So really, really good story. I think I'll stop at that. Leave your comments. Have you read Stormwind? Have you read The Wind from Nowhere? Don't spoil that one yet. But leave your comments about those and Ballard's take on climate change. And come on back for more J.G. Ballard. My next work, number 20, is going to be Millennium, which is a very well-known story of his and was used as the title story for, I believe it was his first collection of short stories. So I'll be doing that one as my next Ballard. A lot more Ballard to come after that, and a lot of other authors too. I hope you'll join me.